History books talk about wars, kings, and victories. They talk about ships, flags, and borders moving on maps. But they do not talk about the moment a young woman wakes up at night because strangers are breaking down her door. They do not talk about the sound of chains hitting the ground while her home burns behind her. They do not talk about what it feels like to be dragged away from everything you know, knowing you will never see it again. In 1631, this happened in a quiet Irish village called Baltimore. By sunrise, the village was empty. Not destroyed. Not defeated in battle. Simply emptied of people. And for the women who were taken, the nightmare was only beginning. This is the story of one of them. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. Baltimore was a small village on the southern coast of Ireland. It was not rich. It was not important. It was the kind of place people were born, lived, and died without ever leaving. The houses were simple. Stone walls. Thatched roofs. Fishermen lived close to the shore. Farmers worked the land just beyond it. People knew each other by name. They married young. They worried about weather, harvests, and whether the fish would be good that season. The world beyond the sea felt far away and unreal. Joan Broadbrook had grown up there. She had never seen a city. She had never traveled farther than the next village. Her life was small, but it was familiar. And it felt safe. On the night of June 20th, 1631, Joan went to sleep in her family's house like she had every night before. There was no warning. No alarm. No sign of danger. At around 2 in the morning, the village woke up screaming. Men with foreign weapons were already inside the houses. Doors were kicked in. Windows shattered. Torches lit the darkness. People ran outside half-dressed, confused, still waking from sleep. They did not understand what was happening. Some thought it was a fire. Others thought it was a local fight. Then they saw the ships. Dark shapes sat quietly in the harbor. Too many to count. Men poured out of them, moving fast, moving with purpose. These were not random thieves. They were Barbary pirates from North Africa. They had sailed for days to reach this village. They knew exactly where to go and what to take. They were not there for gold. They were not there for food. They were there for people. Men were beaten and tied. Children were pulled from their mothers' arms. Women screamed for their families, for their God, for help that did not come. Joan was dragged out of her house barefoot, still in her night clothes. She saw her neighbors chained together in the street. She smelled smoke as homes were set on fire behind them. The pirates worked quickly. They had done this before. Many times. Anyone who resisted was struck down. Anyone too slow was beaten until they moved. The old and weak were not spared, but they were not valued either. By the time the sky began to lighten, Baltimore was silent. 237 people were gone. No bodies were left behind. No prisoners. No village life. Only empty houses, burned roofs, and the sound of the sea. The captives were forced onto ships. Chains were locked around their wrists and ankles. Families were separated without a word. Joan did not know where she was going. She did not know who these men were. She only knew that everything she had ever known was now behind her, disappearing as the ships pulled away from shore. As Baltimore faded into the distance, the truth began to sink in. This was not a raid. This was not temporary. This was the end of her old life. And the beginning of something far worse. The ships moved south, away from Ireland, away from everything familiar. The sea was wide and endless. For most of the captives, this was the first time they had ever been on a ship. Joan was chained with others below the deck. Men, women, and children were separated. Families that had lived side by side for generations were torn apart in minutes. The space below was dark and low. People could not stand upright. They sat pressed against each other, metal biting into their skin every time the ship moved. The air was thick. There was no fresh breeze, no sunlight. Only the smell of fear, sweat, sickness, and salt water. Some people cried openly. Others sat in silence, staring at nothing. A few prayed aloud, their voices shaking as the ship creaked above them. Joan tried to understand what was happening. She did not speak the language of the men who had taken her. She could not ask where they were going. She could not ask why. At first, she believed someone would come after them. Surely the authorities would respond. Surely ships would follow. Surely this mistake would be corrected. But each day, the horizon remained empty. Food was given once a day. Hard bread. Water that tasted old and sour. Those who were sick struggled to eat at all. Some captives became weak within days. The rocking of the ship made them dizzy. The heat below deck was unbearable. When someone collapsed, the pirates did not stop. If the person could still breathe, they were left where they fell. If they died, their chains were unlocked and their body was dragged away. Joan heard the sound of bodies hitting the water. A heavy splash. Then silence. After the first week, time lost meaning. Days blended together. Night and day felt the same in the darkness. People began to change. Strong men grew thin. Children stopped asking questions. Women stopped crying and stared at the wooden floor instead. Joan felt herself growing numb. Her thoughts slowed. Fear became constant, like breathing. She wondered about her family. She wondered if anyone had survived the attack. She wondered if Baltimore still existed at all. Sometimes she imagined she could still smell the grass near her home. She imagined the sound of birds in the morning. She held onto these memories like fragile objects, afraid they would disappear if she let go. After 3 weeks at sea, the ship finally slowed. Voices above deck grew louder. Chains rattled as captives were forced to stand. When Joan was pulled up into the light, the sun burned her eyes. She had not seen daylight in so long that it felt painful. Before her stood a city she had never imagined. White buildings rose from the shore. Tall walls surrounded them. Minarets reached toward the sky. This was Algiers. To Joan, it did not look like a city. It looked like the end of the world. She did not know it yet, but the worst part of her journey had not been the sea. It was what waited for her on land. The captives were marched through the streets of Algiers in long lines. Chains connected wrists and necks. Local people stopped to watch as they passed. Some stared with curiosity. Some with boredom. This was not a rare sight. Joan struggled to keep her balance. Her legs were weak from weeks at sea. The stone streets were hard beneath her bare feet. She tried not to look around, but it was impossible. Everything felt loud and overwhelming. The heat, the smells, the voices speaking words she did not understand. They were taken to a large open square. This was the slave market. Joan did not know what a slave market was. She would soon learn. The captives were separated again. Men were pushed one way, women another. Children were pulled from whoever stood closest. Joan never saw many of them again. Women were taken to public baths. Their chains were removed only long enough for them to be washed. Not for comfort. Not for kindness. It was done so they would look healthy. Cuts and bruises were treated just enough so they would not die too soon. Their hair was cleaned. Their bodies examined by attendants who showed no emotion. After this, they were led to a raised platform in the center of the market. Joan stood there with other women. They were told to stand still, to stay quiet. Buyers gathered around them. Men walked slowly in circles, studying faces and bodies. They spoke to each other, pointing, judging. Hands reached out. Arms were squeezed to check strength. Mouths were pulled open to inspect teeth. Skin was touched, pressed, and examined. Joan felt hands on her that did not belong to her. She did not understand the words, but she understood the meaning. She was being measured. Some women cried. Others tried to pull away. Those who resisted were struck. Hard. Publicly. Joan froze. She stared straight ahead, her heart pounding so loudly she thought others could hear it. She had never been touched like this before. In her village, such things were private. They happened after marriage. With someone you knew. Someone who spoke your language. Here, none of that mattered. A man spoke to the seller and pointed at Joan. Coins changed hands. She was worth less than a horse. Joan did not know what the price meant. She only knew that she now belonged to someone else. The chains were placed back on her wrists. She was pulled away from the platform. As she was led out of the market, she looked back once. Other women were still standing there, waiting, being inspected. She understood then that this place was not about people. It was about ownership. And she had just been sold. Joan was taken away from the market without ceremony. There was no explanation. No farewell. No chance to speak to anyone she had come with. She was now the property of a man she had never met. His name meant nothing to her. His language meant nothing to her. What mattered was simple. He owned her. She was brought to his house in Algiers. It was large, with high walls and an inner courtyard. From the outside, it looked calm and beautiful. Inside, it felt like a cage. Other slaves lived there. Women moved quietly through the halls. They avoided eye contact. They spoke in low voices, if they spoke at all. Joan tried to ask questions, but no one answered her. Some could not understand her. Others understood but were afraid to speak. Her clothes were taken from her. The simple dress she had worn since leaving Ireland was removed. She watched as it was burned. That was the moment she understood something important. Her old life was gone forever. She was washed again, dressed in unfamiliar clothing, and led to a small room. The door closed behind her. She sat alone on the floor for a long time. There were no windows she could reach. The walls were thick. The air smelled of perfume and something else she could not name. Fear settled into her body in a new way. This fear was quiet. heavy. It did not scream. That night, footsteps stopped outside her door. The man who owned her entered. He did not need to speak her language. He did not need her consent. The law did not protect her. No one would punish him. Joan did not scream. She did not fight. She had learned already that resistance brought pain, not rescue. Later, when it was over, she lay still. She stared at the ceiling. She felt like she had left her body somewhere else. Days turned into weeks. Joan learned the rules of her new life without anyone explaining them. She learned when to stand, when to be silent, when to move quickly. She learned that mistakes were punished. A broken dish could mean no food. A wrong look could mean a beating. She learned the sound of footsteps that meant danger. She was forced to learn new words, new gestures, a new way of existing. Her name was rarely used. When it was, it sounded wrong in their mouths. Joan was no longer Joan Broadbrook. She was something else now. Something owned. At night, she remembered her village. She remembered the sound of waves against the shore. She remembered the faces of people who might already be dead. Sometimes she wished she had died with them. But morning always came. And with it, another day she had to survive. Time moved differently in captivity. Days did not feel like days anymore. They were just long stretches of waiting. Waiting for orders. Waiting for footsteps. Waiting for night. Joan learned quickly that survival did not mean freedom. It meant learning how to disappear inside yourself. She watched the other women closely. They taught her without words. Some women obeyed everything instantly. They moved fast, kept their eyes low, and spoke only when spoken to. They were beaten less often. Others resisted in small ways. They worked slowly. They refused to learn the language. They cried openly. Those women suffered the most. Joan chose silence. She learned the local words for simple things. Water. Food. Come. Go. Each new word felt like a small betrayal of who she had been. But refusing to learn only brought punishment. She learned that conversion was expected. Not demanded all at once, but pushed constantly. Promises were made. Threats followed. Conversion did not bring freedom. Everyone knew that. But it could make life slightly less cruel. Some women accepted it. Others refused until they were broken. Joan did not know what she believed anymore. Faith felt distant in a place where suffering had no end. She learned the rhythms of the house. Morning work. Midday silence. Evening tension. She cleaned floors until her hands cracked. She carried water until her shoulders burned. She cooked meals she would never eat. If she worked well, she was ignored. That became her goal. At night, she lay awake listening to the sounds of the house. She learned which footsteps meant safety and which meant danger. She learned when to hold her breath. The worst part was not the pain. It was the waiting. Waiting to be called. Waiting to be chosen. Waiting for something bad to happen. Some women tried to compete for favor. They dressed carefully. They smiled when they did not want to. They hoped attention might protect them. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it only made things worse. Joan saw women disappear. One day they were there. The next day, they were gone. Sold. Traded. Sent somewhere worse. No one asked questions. Joan stopped asking questions too. To survive, she learned to shrink her world. She focused on small things. The feel of water on her hands. The sound of birds in the courtyard. The memory of bread baking back home. She repeated the names of people she loved in her mind. Over and over. Afraid she would forget them. Sometimes she forgot her own face. Months passed. Then years. Joan's body changed. Her voice grew quieter. Her movements became careful and precise. She was alive. But she was not living. She had become what captivity demanded. Someone who existed only to endure. Joan did not know how many years passed. In captivity, time did not come with numbers. There were no calendars. No seasons to mark change. Only aging. She saw it in the other women first. Girls who arrived young slowly became tired women with empty eyes. Women who once moved quickly now walked carefully, holding their backs. Those who could no longer work were spoken to differently. More quietly. More briefly. They were being measured for usefulness. Joan understood what that meant. She learned that some captives were eventually freed. Not because of mercy, but because someone paid. Ransoms came from far away. From families who sold land. From churches that collected coins over years. From people who still remembered the names of the lost. But most captives were never ransomed. They were poor. They were forgotten. Or they came from places that no longer existed. Joan did not know if anyone remembered her. At night, she imagined her name being spoken in her village church. She imagined her mother's voice. Her father's hands. But memories faded when they were not fed. One day, Joan was told she was leaving. She did not feel relief. Only fear. She had learned that change often meant worse. But this time, it was different. A ransom had been paid. She was freed not because her suffering had ended, but because someone, somewhere, had managed to buy her back. The journey home felt unreal. She traveled with others who had also survived. They spoke different languages, but they shared the same silence. When Joan finally returned to Ireland, nothing was as she remembered. Baltimore was gone. The village had never recovered. Many houses were empty. Families had moved inland. The sea was no longer trusted. People looked at her with confusion, with pity, with suspicion. She had been gone too long. Her family was gone. Some dead. Some scattered. No one was waiting for her. Joan realized then that captivity had taken more than years. It had taken her place in the world. She carried memories no one wanted to hear. Pain that made others uncomfortable. A past that could not be spoken without shame. The village prayed for captives like her every Sunday for years. Her name had been read aloud again and again. Then one day, it stopped. She had been declared lost. Forgotten. Joan lived quietly after that. There are no records of her later life. No letters. No grave marked with her name. History moved on. But her story remains. Not because it was unique, but because it was common. Hundreds of thousands of women like Joan were taken, sold, used, erased. Their lives did not end in battle. They ended slowly, in silence, far from home. This is not a story of the past. It is a reminder that civilizations forget what makes them uncomfortable. That suffering does not need to be hidden to be ignored. And that behind every number in history, there was once a person who woke up one night, heard screaming, and never came home. Some stories were buried. Now, this one is remembered.